Hello, everybody. This is Jeremiah with Man with a Mug. I'm really glad you're here. For those of you watching today, this will be uploaded on the 4th of July. So if you're in America, happy 4th of July, everybody. I live in America, so I feel very blessed and honored to be living in this country. It's not a perfect one, but I couldn't imagine myself anywhere else. So I'm really glad you're here. Like I said, today's coffee, I didn't have an American mug necessarily, but this is the most American mug I have. It's the other main mug, like I said in one of the previous episodes. I was drinking out of a blue and tan mug with a mallard on it, and it said Maine. This came in a set, and this is the other one with the moose, as you can kind of see here. It's brown and tan. I really like this one personally. I like this one a little bit better than the other one, just because it's a moose. Moose, meese. They're cool. Coffee we're drinking today, not sponsored, but in the interest of 4th of July, this is La Colombe 1776 Liberty Blend. It comes in a really cool tin. It's out of Philadelphia. It's a coffee company here in America. In Philadelphia, you can't get much more patriotic than that, unless you go with Black Rifle Coffee. But yeah, I really like this one. It was just in my local store, and it came in a cool tin. So I figured that I'd pick some up. Relatively affordable. I like it a lot, actually. I made this in a French press. So we're going to sip on this. Today, as we read, we're going to jump back into Walden today. We left off talking about clothing, kind of as an article, trends, generally exploring that. Today, it looks like he's exploring the concept of shelter. He's talking about kind of things that humanity, values over certain things, clothing, food, shelter. We kind of went over clothing. This one is shelter. Our air conditioning is working overtime because of the heat wave. It's about 100 degrees here on the northeast of where we are on the eastern seaboard. Give me 1 second. I'm going to shut this door just so you don't hear too much. But yeah, hopefully that closing the door will drown that out a little bit. I'm cranking overtime, and even so, it doesn't get everything. Our second floor is still pretty hot, but that's how houses go. I think it was end of yesterday. It was 100 degrees here, and our AC was set to 68, and it was probably 76 in the house because it just couldn't keep up. But we're blessed and lucky to have any sort of air conditioning in general, so can't complain. Anyway, back to Walden. We'll start off here. As for a shelter, I will not deny that this is now a necessary of life, though there are instances of men having done without it for long periods in colder countries than this. Samuel Lang says that the Laplander in his skin dress and in a skin bag which he puts over his head and shoulders will sleep night after night on the snow, in a degree of cold which would extinguish the life of one exposed to it in any woolen clothing. He had seen them asleep thus. Yet he adds, they are not hardier than other people. But probably man did not live long on the earth without discovering the convenience which there is in a house, the domestic comforts, which phrase may have originally signified the satisfactions of the house more than of the family. Though these must be extremely partial and occasional in those climates where the house is associated, in our thoughts with winter on the rainy season chiefly, and 2/3 of the year, except for a parasol, is unnecessary. In our climate, in the summer, it was formerly almost solely a covering at night. In the Indian gazettes, a wigwam was a symbol of a day's march, and a row of them, same spelling, different pronunciation, and a row of them, cut or painted on the bark of a tree, signified that so many times they had camped. Man was not made so large-limbed and robust, but that he must seek to narrow his world, and wall in a space such as fitted him. He was at first bare and out of doors, but though this was pleasant enough in serene and warm weather, by daylight the rainy season in the winter, to say nothing of the torrid sun, would perhaps have nipped his race in the bud if he had not made haste to clothe himself with the shelter of a house. Adam and Eve, according to the fable, wore the bower before other clothes. Man wanted a home, a place of warmth or comfort, first or physical warmth, then the warmth of the affections. We may imagine a time when, in the infancy of the human race, some enterprising mortal crept into a hollow in a rock for shelter. Every child begins the world again, to some extent, and loves to stay outdoors. even in wet and cold. It plays house as well as horse, having an instinct for it. Who does not remember the interest with which, when young, he looked at shelving rocks or any approach to a cave? It was the natural yearning of that portion of our most primitive ancestor which still survives in us. From the cave, we have advanced to roofs of palm leaves, of bark and boughs, of linen woven and stretched, of grass and straw, and of boards and shingles, of stones and tiles. At last, we know not what it is to live in the open air, and our lives are domestic in more senses than we think. From the hearth, the field is a great distance. It would be well, perhaps, if we were to spend more of our days and nights without any obstruction between us and the celestial bodies, if the poet did not speak so much from under a roof, or the saint dwell there so long. Birds do not sing in caves, nor do doves cherish their innocence in dovecots. However, if one desires to construct a dwelling house, it behooves him to exercise a little Yankee shrewdness, lest after all he must find himself in a workhouse, a labyrinth without a clue, a museum, an almshouse, a prison, or a splendid mausoleum instead. Consider first how slight a shelter is absolutely necessary. I have seen Penobscot Indians in this town, living in tents of thin cotton cloth while the snow was nearly a foot deep around them, and I thought they would be glad to have it deeper to keep out of the wind. Formerly, when how to get my living honestly, with the freedom left for my proper pursuits, was a question which vexed me even more than it does now, for unfortunately I am become somewhat callous. I used to see a large box by the railroad, 6 feet by 3 feet wide, in which the laborers locked up their tools at night, and it suggested to me that every man who was hard pushed might get such a one for $1, and having bored a few auger holes in it, to admit the air at least, get into it when it rained and at night, and hook down the lid, and so have freedom in his love and in his soul be free. This did not appear the worst, nor by any means a despicable alternative. You could sit up as late as you pleased, and whenever you got up, go abroad without any landlord or house lord dogging you for rent. Many a man is harassed to death to pay the rent of a larger and more luxurious box who would not have frozen to death in such a box as this. I am far from jesting. Economy is a subject which admits being treated with levity, but it cannot be so disposed of. A comfortable house for a rude. I lost my place. A comfortable house for a rude and hardy race that lived mostly out of doors was once made here almost entirely of such materials as nature furnished, ready to their hands. Gookin, who was superintendent of the Indians subject to the Massachusetts colony, writing in 1674, says, "The best of their houses are covered very neatly, tight and warm, with barks of trees, slipped from their bodies at those seasons when the sap is up, and made into great flakes, with pressure of weighty timber when they are green. The meaner sort are covered with mats, which they make of a kind of bulrush, and are also indifferently tight and warm, but not so good as the former. Some I have seen, 60 or 100 feet long and 30 feet broad, have often lodged in their wigwams, and found them as warm as the best English houses." He adds that they were commonly carpeted and lined with well-wrought embroidered mats, and were furnished with various utensils. The Indians had advanced so far as to regulate the effect of the wind by a mat suspended over the hole in the roof and moved by a string. Such a lodge was in the first instance, such a lodge was in the first instance constructed in a day or two at most, and taken down and put up in a few hours. And every family owned one, or its apartment in one. In the savage state, every family owns a shelter, as good as the best, and sufficient for its coarser and simpler wants. But I think that I speak within bounds when I say that, though the birds of the air have their nests, and the foxes their holes, and the savages their wigwams, in modern civilized society not more than one half the families own a shelter. In the large towns and cities where civilization especially prevails, the number of those who own a shelter is a very small fraction of the whole. The rest pay an annual tax for this outside garment of all, become indispensable summer and winter, which would buy a village of Indian wigwams, but now helps to keep them poor as long as they live. I did not mean to insist here on the disadvantage of hiring compared with owning, but it is evident that the savage owns his shelter because it costs so little, while the civilized man hires his commonly because he cannot afford to own it, nor can he, in the long run, any better afford to hire. But, answers one, by merely paying this tax, the poor civilized man secures an abode, which is a place compared with the savages, an annual rent of from $25 to $100, these are the country rates, entitles him to the benefit of improvements of centuries, spacious apartments, clean paint and paper, Rumford fireplace, back plastering, Venetian blinds, copper pump, spring lock, a commodious cellar, and many other things. But how happens it that he who is said to enjoy these things is so commonly a poor civilized man, while the savage is, who has them not, is rich as a savage? If it is asserted that civilization is a real advance in the condition of man, and I think that it is, though only the wise improve their advantages, it must be shown that it has produced better dwellings without making them more costly, and the cost of a thing is the amount of what I will call life, which is required to be exchanged for it, immediately or in the long run. An average house in this neighborhood costs perhaps $800, and to lay up this sum will take from 10 to 15 years of a laborer's life, even if he is not encumbered with a family, estimating the pecuniary value of every man's labor at $1 a day, for if some receive more, others receive less, so that he must have spent more than half his life commonly before his wigwam will be earned. If we suppose him to pay a rent instead, this is but a doubtful choice of evils. Would the savage have been wise to exchange his wigwam for a palace on these terms? It may be guessed that I reduce almost the whole advantage of holding this superfluous property as a fund and store against the future, so far as the individual is concerned, mainly to the defraying of funeral expenses. But perhaps a man is not required to bury himself. Nevertheless, this points to an important distinction between the civilized man and the savage. And no doubt they have designs on us for our benefit, in making the life of a civilized people an institution, in which the life of an individual is to a great extent absorbed in order to preserve and perfect that of the race. But I wish to show at what a sacrifice this advantage is at present obtained, and to suggest that we may possibly so live as to secure all the advantage, without suffering any of the disadvantage. What mean ye by saying that the poor ye have always with you, or that the fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge? As I live, saith the Lord God, ye shall not have occasion any more to use this proverb in Israel. Behold, all souls are mine, as the soul of the Father, so also the soul of the Son is mine. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. When I consider my neighbors, the farmers of Concord, who are at least as well off as the other classes, I find that for the most part they have been toiling 20, 30, or 40 years, that they may become the real owners of their farms, which commonly they have inherited with encumbrances, or else bought with hired money, and we may regard 1/3 of that toil as the cost of their houses, but commonly they have not paid for them yet. It is true the encumbrances somewhat outweigh the value of the farm, or sometimes, outweigh the value of the farm, so that the farm itself becomes one great encumbrance, and still a man is found to inherit it, being well acquainted with it, as he says. On applying to the assessors, I am surprised to learn that they cannot at once name a dozen in the town who own their farms free and clear. If you would know the history of these homesteads, inquire at the bank where they are mortgaged. The man who has actually paid for his farm with labor on it is so rare that every neighbor can point to him. I doubt if there are 3 such men in Concord. What has been said of the merchants, that of a very large majority, even 97 in 100, are sure to fail, is equally true of the farmers. With regard to the merchants, however, one of them says pertinently that a great part of their failures are not genuine pecuniary failures, but merely failures to fulfill their engagements, because it is inconvenient. That is, it's the moral character that breaks down. But this puts an infinitely worse fate. Hold, please. Recharging the tongue. But this puts an I tried. But this puts an infinitely worse face on the matter, and suggests besides that probably not even the other 3 succeed in saving their souls, but are perchance bankrupt in a worse sense than they would who fail honestly. I didn't read that right. But are perchance bankrupt in a worse sense than they who fail honestly. Bankruptcy and repudiation are the springboards from which much of our civilization's vaults and turns on its somersets. But the savage stands on the unelastic plank of famine. Yet the Middlesex cattle show goes off here with eclat annually. ECLAT, italicized. A little tilde on the E. As if all the joints of the agricultural machine were suent. The farmer is endeavoring to solve the problem of a livelihood by a formula more complicated than the problem itself. To get his shoestrings, he speculates in herds of cattle. With consummate skill, he has set his trap with a hairspring to catch comfort and independence. And then, as he turned away, got his own leg into it. This is the reason he is poor. And for a similar reason, we are all poor in respect to 1,000 savage comforts, though surrounded by luxuries. As Chapman sings, the false society of men, for earthly greatness, all heavenly comforts, rarefies to air. I feel like it's a pretty good place to stop today. Walden's usually a bit of a longer episode, but I'm going to keep it shorter today. Excuse me, I have a sip of coffee here. I appreciate Henry David Thoreau. He's very straightforward in that you don't have to guess what he's thinking in this specific section talking about houses. There's still more section on it, and I'll finish that in a later episode and then move on to the other sections. But it kind of goes back to clothing and housing. I think he's going to tie a lot of different things into just simple living. Um, what are we trying to do to impress other people, and what are we doing just to kind of be viewed as higher class or better in the eyes of others? Versus what can we do that we genuinely enjoy? What do we need? And then what do we want? Those are two different things, and it's important to make that distinction. So I appreciate the simple living that Thoreau preaches in his book. It's very convicting to me. I also appreciate simple living, try to cut costs where we can because we're a young family and we're living on a single income. I'm working full time and then some sometimes, but yeah, I we appreciate simple living here, and it's a good area of the country to live simply, but it can still be a challenge. Keeping up with the Joneses or just seeing something of your neighbors. It's very easy to covet something that you don't have and that may be considered shinier than yours, but take time today to be grateful for what you do have. And even if things aren't necessarily what you want them to be, it doesn't need to be. Because bloom where you're planted right here, right now. Be appreciative of the things you have and the luxuries that you find yourself with. There's always something to be grateful for. I think the reason that I appreciate simple living as a general rule is because it fosters more gratitude for what you have. Um, at least that's the way I find it for me. So, thank you, Thoreau. Simple living. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you all next time. There's just coffee.